What's up, guys? Neil Orfield here, and I'm going to show you how I will be setting up my fantasy cruncher for tonight's single game slate between the Chiefs and the Raiders. This is for FanDuel, and this video will be showing you how I'm setting it up for the largest field contest on FanDuel. So this is for GPP only and large field GPP only. I play the main contest. There are a lot of large field GPPs that you can choose from, and I think that this approach will work for any of those large field GPPs. I'll start, as always, by changing my view on the main screen so I can see exactly what I want to see in the middle of the screen. I have a quick view saved, so I'm going to go to columns, quick views, my showdown settings, quick view that I've saved. So I can see my projections, ownership projections, how much I'm getting of different players once I've run a crunch, etc., right in the middle of my screen. And then most of the work I'm going to do will be in the advanced options tab. And then within the advanced options, I'm going to be working within the general tab and the groups tab. Starting in the general tab, unique players per lineup. I'm doing 150 lineups. I'm going to leave this at one unique player per lineup, meaning that my lineups can be one player away from each other. I would maybe change that to 2 unique players per lineup if you're playing like 20 or fewer lineups. I'm leaving that at 1 for me, though. Team salary cap. I don't set a minimum salary to be used. I do set a maximum. The reason being I'm trying to get a little bit different so that I'm not running out a lineup that's going to be duplicated 200, 300 times. If your lineup is duplicated 200 or 300 times, then even if you do win, you're not going to win a lot of money. It's a negative EV approach to these single game slates long term. Even if you can make, if you play a single lineup and you bink, you might win $5,000. That's great with a single lineup. Don't get me wrong, that is a great ROI. But long term, those lineups are just not going to win money. Typically, to win money on these showdown slates long term, you want to be making lineups that are not going to be duplicated a ton, so that when you do hit, you're going to win more money. Of course, the further you get away from projections, the less likely you are to win. And if you do use a salary cap, you're getting away from projections a little bit. Your lineups are not going to project as well as those lineups typically that use the full $60,000 salary cap. So keep that in mind. But I am trying to make lineups that when they win more money. So I'm going to set a max salary here. And on FanDuel, every salary is $500 increments. So you could set this at whatever you want it to be. I would leave at least 1,000 on the table, though. So that'd be 59,000. For the purpose of this, I'm going to set it at 58,500. So we're leaving at least $1,500 on the table in every lineup we make here. Offensive players versus defense, the default is 2. I'm going to change that to 4. If I get 4 Chiefs offensive players against the Las Vegas defense, I'm okay with that. The Las Vegas defense can put up a good number of fantasy points, even though the Kansas City offense does well, because defenses can score fantasy points via turnovers, via sacks, and then of course via touchdowns. No, those do hurt the Kansas City offense. They don't have a huge impact necessarily on the Kansas City offense. So there is negative correlation between the defense and the opposing offense, but it is overstated. People factor that in a little bit too much in their lineup. So as a way to get different, I don't mind having up to 4 players from one team against the defense of the opposing team. It's not something I want in a ton of my lineups, but in 150, if I have a few, I'm happy with that. So I'm setting that to max 4. 100%, so I can get up to 100% exposure to any single player. I do usually set caps in the MVP spot, but I will do that on the main screen. Use randomness. I use the high randomness. I'm going to set it to 50%. If you're using classic randomness, I might set that at 30 or 40%. And if you want more control over your lineups, you set it to less randomness. The more control you want, the less you use the randomness feature. I'm okay with giving up some control and using a little bit more randomness, so I use 50%. Players from each team max, I leave that at 4, so I can get up to 4 players from one team against one of the other. That is typically underutilized in these single game slates. So I kind of like lineups that have 4 players from one team and just 1 from the other. Certainly happy to allow it by including up to 4 players max from each team. And then in the groups tab, I'm going to make a few groups. Hey guys, if you're a new Stokastic Plus Platinum or NFL user and want to give our NFL DFS tools a test run before purchasing, we have a great offer for you. Get access to all of our NFL DFS tools 100% free for 3 days. This includes full access to all the premium content and tools for NFL DFS that we have to offer on stokastic.com, including new tools such as our lineup generator and player compare, as well as player projections, ownership projections, top stacks, our boom bust tool, and so much more. Click the link in the description of this video below to join to activate your 3-day free trial now. Please note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included with this trial offer. Starting with Mahomes at MVP as my key player, I'll name this one Mahomes MVP. I've already added Mahomes as my key player in the MVP spot. Now I'm going to add all of these Chiefs pass catchers to a secondary group. And I'm including the running backs. You don't necessarily need to include the running backs, but I think Mahomes throws it enough. Certainly to CEH, he throws it to him plenty in the end zone. So I'm going to include those running backs in this group. And I think if I have Mahomes in the MVP spot, I want to have at least one Chiefs pass catcher elsewhere in the lineup. Mahomes does run a little bit, so theoretically he could, score a touchdown on the ground and make it as the optimal MVP without more than one, with just one receiver in the flex spot. I think it's unlikely that Mahomes is the optimal MVP without any pass catchers in the flex spot, just because in general, Mahomes is scoring his points through the air. And every time he throws the ball to a pass catcher, that pass catcher is outscoring him. So typically, I think if Mahomes makes it into the MVP spot, if he's the highest scoring player on the slate, probably at least one Chiefs pass catcher has done pretty well. So I'm going to leave this at if any key player is used. So that's Mahomes at the MVP is my key player. If using Mahomes at MVP, I'm going to use at least one of these pass catchers in each of those lineups. And I'd prefer to get a couple, just because, again, if Mahomes is throwing it too concentrated to just one player, most likely that player is going to outscore him. So you'd prefer that he's spreading the ball around to these players. So I'm going to give little boosts to all of the Chiefs pass catchers for lineups that have Mahomes in the MVP spot to make it more likely that if I have Mahomes in the MVP spot, I have multiple Chiefs pass catchers also in the lineup. A little bit of a smaller boost to Kelsey, just because he costs so much, and I'm more concerned about Kelsey outscoring Mahomes. All right, I'm not even going to give boost to the running backs. Then I'll make a new group. Derek Carr at the MVP spot. And Raiders pass catchers in the secondary group. Again, I'm including these running backs. Don't necessarily need to. And same thing, I'm going to leave it at least one. Derek Carr is not a great rusher, hasn't scored a rushing touchdown in a couple of years now. So most likely when Derek Carr is scoring fantasy points, he's doing it through the air, and his receivers are outscoring him on each of those plays. I think that I want at least one Raiders pass catcher in the flex. I'd like to have more than one in most of those lineups where I have Derek Carr at the MVP. So I'm going to give boost to all of his receiving options. I'm not going to give boost to the running backs, actually. Just the receivers. All right, so another group that I could make, and groups that I will consider making down the line, is I could make a Derek Carr in the flex role and say if I have Derek Carr in the flex, I want at least one Las Vegas pass catcher elsewhere in the lineup, or give boost to those players. I'm not going to do it right now. If I have a few lineups that have Chiefs onslaught and just Derek Carr coming back, I'm typically okay with that. If it's just a few, it's somewhat thin just because generally, as I said, Derek Carr, every time he throws the ball, the pass catcher is outscoring him. So we need to be spreading the ball around to work out as the optimal captain or the optimal MVP. So I'm okay with it. I also don't want to see it a ton. I don't typically allow for it on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, just because it is half point PPR instead of full point PPR, it's at least somewhat reasonable that Derek Carr could make it in as the optimal flex without any other pass catchers. So I'm just going to see how often that comes up now. I'm going to crunch some lineups, and then I'll come back and change the group if I need to later on. I'm going to crunch 150 using my projections. Also, I'm going to go in right now and cap my MVP exposure for each player. 20%. Up to you if you want to set a cap at all in the MVP spot or what you want that cap to be. This is FanDuel. There's no salary multiplier. So typically just whoever scores the most fantasy points on the slate is going to be the optimal MVP, assuming that they make it into the lineup. Sometimes they'll be prohibited by salary, but typically the highest scoring player is going to be in the MVP spot. So factor that in, but I'm going to set my exposure cap to 20% here, and then I'm going to crunch 150 lineups. And we see what comes out. Getting to, as expected, the players who project the best, I get in the MVP spot a lot, up to that 20% cap. Mahomes, Carr, a little bit less Adams than I thought I would get, a good amount of Kelsey, etc., etc. We've got about 60% Mahomes in the flex spot, 35% Derek Carr. And now here's where I start needing to maybe make some adjustments. Am I okay with just 5% Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Maybe I'd want to give him a little bit of a boost. Maybe I'll give him a thumbs up. Getting 3.3% Isaiah Pacheco. He's 3.3% project ownership. I don't know. Am I okay with that? Maybe I want a little bit more Pacheco. He looked really good in the last game. Maybe they give him a few more opportunities. Maybe he can score a touchdown and be optimal. He's at a relatively cheap price tag. McKinnon, always happy to get a little bit of McKinnon. 12% looks good. And then down here, Brandon Bolden. I don't think I need a ton of Brandon Bolden in my lineups. Maybe I'll want a few. But then Zamir White, Amir Abdullah, Michael Burton, Jacob Johnson all have some projection, which suggests that they might have an opportunity here or there in this game, but their projection is below 3 fantasy points. So I'll have to think, do I actually want these guys in my lineup set? If I do, I'll give a little bit of a boost up to 3 fantasy points so they could at least theoretically make it into my lineups. Not really making that decision right now. I don't really know how much of those guys I want. I think I'd rather take my shots in this game on the wide receivers. So maybe I want Sky Moore at 4.1% at 6,000. He wasn't more involved last week than he had been previously. So I wouldn't mind getting to some Sky Moore, maybe Justin Watson. And I'm just looking position by position. What kind of numbers am I getting from each player? Noah Gray at 5%. Don't mind that one bit. I'm going to try and get to some Noah Gray. Oh. And then Darren Waller. He's one that I'm not getting any naturally that I would not be happy to have 0% Darren Waller. I think that he is always live to put up a big game. So I'm going to give him a little bit of a projection boost. 14% Matthew Wright, 8% Daniel Carlson. Now, if I don't change these projections at all, most likely I'm going to get a little bit less of these guys just because of the other changes I've made to projections relative to everybody else. Now, these projections are lower just because projections are all relative. So I would need to give a little bit of a boost if I want to get, some of these guys in my lineup. Maybe I'll give just tiny boost there. And then defense getting 0% Raiders defense, 2% Chiefs defense. I'll have to think about how much I want them. Typically, I want to have, if the Raiders are going to get 2% ownership, I think I'd rather take a few shots there. Don't even know what I'll need to give boost to, but I will give a little boost to these guys and see what happens for the defenses. Not that often you see defenses this low owned. And it makes sense because this is a game that a lot of points should be scored. There is negative correlation there with the defenses. But if nobody else is doing it, I think football is a chaotic enough sport that I would rather get above the field at these numbers. And again, yeah, not getting into a ton of kickers now because their projections, I didn't give them a huge boost. So now maybe if I want to have more, give a little bit of a boost. But anyway, this part of what I'm doing, this is more art than science. There's not a lot to it. I should look at what my lineups actually look like. Am I getting into a ton of lineups that have Derek Carr in the flex spot, for example, or Patrick Mahomes in the flex spot without any pass catchers? So far, these ones look good. Derek Carr with Hunter Renfrow, Mahomes with Fortson and Kelsey. So now here we run into one right away. Patrick Mahomes in the flex spot as my only Chiefs player. What is the likelihood that Patrick Mahomes is the highest scoring Chief? I don't know. I don't know what the likelihood is there. It's something that I wouldn't mind having in a few lineups, but if I'm seeing it in 10% of my lineups, I would probably go and group that out and say require at least one pass catcher elsewhere in the lineup, or I would at least give boost to the pass catchers, to Chiefs pass catchers if I have Mahomes in the flex. Here we've got Carr with Adams. This looks like a pretty positively correlated lineup. Mahomes with Juju. Here we've got Derek Carr in the MVP spot with just Hunter Renfrow in the flex spot. I think I'm okay with that. I can see a lot of different ways that it happens. Here we'd probably need, obviously, Mahomes to be outscoring Devontae Adams, maybe Juju, depending on the price tags involved. But this looks like a lineup where maybe Devontae Adams puts up a decent game, but not quite enough to make it into the optimal. He's helping Derek Carr there score some points, but not outscoring him. And then Derek Carr is also scoring more points to Hunter Renfrow. So I think this is a feasible lineup. Again, Mahomes with just MVS, same kind of thing. Maybe he's scoring a lot of points by throwing to Travis Kelce, but not enough that Travis Kelce makes it into the optimal. There are ways for it to work out. So in general, I'm okay with this. Now we're seeing Derek Carr down here without any Raiders pass catcher. Again, that's something probably if I were making less than 150 lineups, I would group that out. I would say if I have Derek Carr in the flex spot, include at least one Raiders pass catcher, or at least make it more likely by giving boosts. With 150 lineups, I'm okay with seeing it a few times. But again, if I'm making 20 lineups, I would probably group out again this one. I'm getting maybe a little bit more than I'd like. So maybe these are groups that I'll go and set a Derek Carr in the flex. Make sure I have pass catchers somewhere else in the lineup. Here we have Mahomes again. So, maybe not the best lineup set right now. I'll probably go in and make another group later. Maybe I'll adjust some of these player projections or give some thumbs up to adjust my player exposures a little bit. But these are just kind of my thoughts as I'm going through and making these lineups. The things I'm looking at, are they correlated the way I want them to be, and also am I getting to exposure levels for each player that I like? And these are things that I'm going to keep adjusting, and I'll probably if I have the time, I'll probably crunch it several times before I get to the lineups that I like. But that's just my general approach. Good luck tonight. I hope you can find some success using this or a similar process.